The morning sun broke through the London clouds, casting a golden glow over the ancient stones of Westminster Abbey. The city had been preparing for this day for months, and now the moment had finally arrived. Thousands of people lined the streets, their faces filled with excitement and anticipation. They had camped overnight, some with blankets and thermoses of hot tea, just to catch a glimpse of history unfolding before their eyes. Inside Kensington Palace, the atmosphere was a mix of calm preparation and quiet tension. Kate stood before a large mirror in her dressing room, surrounded by a small team of trusted stylists and assistants. Her dress for the day had been chosen with meticulous care, a design that honored tradition while reflecting her own elegant taste. The ivory gown featured delicate embroidery that sparkled subtly in the light, each stitch representing hours of craftsmanship by skilled artisans who understood the weight of this occasion. William was in an adjacent room, being fitted into his formal ceremonial uniform. The deep blue fabric was adorned with golden braiding and medals that told the story of his service and heritage. He adjusted his collar, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with the day. This was not just another royal engagement. This was the coronation of his father, King Charles, a moment that would be remembered for generations. As a son, he felt pride. As a future king, he felt the magnitude of the monarchy's continuity. The children were perhaps the most excited of all. Young George, now old enough to understand the significance of the day, sat patiently as his outfit was adjusted. He had been briefed on what to expect, the protocols he needed to follow, and the cameras that would capture every moment. Yet despite the formality, there was still a boyish enthusiasm in his eyes. Charlotte, graceful beyond her years, wore a dress that complemented her mother's elegance. She had practiced her walk and her posture, wanting everything to be perfect. Louis, the youngest, brought an element of unpredictability to the morning. His energy was infectious, and keeping him focused was a task that required gentle patience. Kate moved through the rooms, checking on each child with the practiced ease of a mother who knew her family well. She adjusted George's collar, whispered encouragement to Charlotte, and shared a smile with Louis that reminded him to be on his best behavior. These small moments of connection grounded her amidst the grandeur of the day. She was not just a princess preparing for a coronation. She was a mother ensuring her children felt secure and supported. The palace staff worked with quiet efficiency, coordinating schedules and confirming arrangements. Security teams had reviewed every detail multiple times. The route to Westminster Abbey had been secured, and contingency plans were in place for any scenario. Nothing was left to chance. The royal protection officers moved through their protocols with the seriousness the day demanded, aware that the eyes of the world would be watching. As the departure time approached, the family gathered in the main entrance hall. William looked at Kate, and a silent understanding passed between them. They had walked this path together for years, supporting each other through triumphs and challenges. Today was another chapter in their shared journey, one that would be documented in history books and remembered long after they were gone. The vehicles waiting outside were polished to perfection, their surfaces reflecting the morning light. The motorcade would wind through the streets of London, passing landmarks that had witnessed centuries of royal history. The Tower of London, Buckingham Palace, and the Houses of Parliament would all be part of the backdrop as they made their way to the Abbey. Each location held stories of kings and queens who had come before, adding layers of meaning to the journey. Kate took one final look in the mirror, not out of vanity, but to ensure everything was in place. Her hair was styled in a way that was both classic and contemporary, secured with a tiara that had been worn by royal women before her. The weight of the jewelry was a physical reminder of the legacy she had married into, a legacy she now helped to carry forward. William gathered the children, speaking to them in a calm, reassuring tone. He reminded them of the day's importance while also letting them know that he and their mother would be right there with them every step of the way. George nodded seriously, Charlotte smiled with confidence, and Louis promised to be good, though his wiggling suggested that staying still might be a challenge. The doors of Kensington Palace opened, and the family stepped out into the bright morning. The air was crisp, filled with the distant sounds of crowds gathering along the processional route. Flags flew from buildings, and banners proclaimed congratulations and support. The nation was ready to celebrate, and the royal family was ready to join them in this historic moment. As they settled into their vehicles, Kate glanced at William. He reached for her hand, a brief gesture of solidarity and love. Whatever the day would bring, they would face it together as they always had. The engine started and the motorcade began to move, carrying them toward Westminster Abbey and into the pages of history. The coronation was about to begin, and the arrival of Prince William, Kate, and their children would be a moment that captured the hearts of people around the world. The motorcade moved smoothly through the streets of London, flanked by mounted police officers whose horses stepped in perfect rhythm. The crowds lining the barriers were enormous, stretching as far as the eye could see in both directions. People waved flags, held up phones to capture photos, and cheered as the royal vehicles passed. Some had tears streaming down their faces, overcome with emotion at witnessing such a historic moment. Others simply smiled, proud to be British and proud to be part of the celebration. Inside the lead vehicle, William and Kate sat with their children arranged around them. George was positioned where he could see out the window, watching the crowds with wide eyes. He had attended royal events before, but nothing on this scale. The sheer number of people was overwhelming yet exciting. He waved tentatively at first, then with more confidence as he saw how people responded to the gesture. Their faces lit up and they waved back with even greater enthusiasm. Charlotte sat beside her mother, mirroring Kate's composed demeanor. She had inherited her mother's natural grace and seemed to understand instinctively how to carry herself in public. When she waved, it was with a gentle, controlled motion that looked both sweet and dignified. Kate watched her daughter with quiet pride, recognizing that Charlotte was growing into her role with remarkable poise. Louis, true to his spirited nature, pressed his face against the window, marveling at everything he saw. The horses, the uniforms, the flags, the people, it was all fascinating to his young mind. Kate occasionally redirected his attention, reminding him to sit properly, but she also allowed him his moments of wonder. He was, after all, still a child, and some spontaneity was both expected and endearing. The route took them past some of London's most iconic landmarks. As they approached Buckingham Palace, William reflected on the countless times he had entered and exited those gates throughout his life. The palace was more than just a residence. It was a symbol of continuity and duty. His grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, had lived much of her life there, dedicating herself to service with unwavering commitment. Now his father would carry that torch forward, and one day, William himself would bear that same responsibility. The crowds grew even denser as they neared Westminster Abbey. Barriers held back waves of people, all straining for a better view. Union Jack flags fluttered in the breeze, mixing with flags from Commonwealth nations and other countries whose citizens had traveled to witness the coronation. The diversity of the crowd reflected the global nature of the monarchy and its continued relevance in a modern world. Police officers and security personnel maintained vigilant watch, their eyes scanning the crowds and surrounding buildings. The coordination required for an event of this magnitude was extraordinary. Months of planning had gone into ensuring every detail was executed flawlessly. Communication systems crackled with updates as different teams confirmed their readiness. Snipers on rooftops, plainclothes officers in the crowds, and command centers monitoring multiple feeds all worked together to create an invisible web of protection. Kate could feel her heart beating a little faster as Westminster Abbey came into view. The ancient structure stood majestic against the sky, its Gothic architecture a testament to centuries of history. Kings and queens had been crowned within those walls since 1066. Poets were buried there, statesmen were honored there, and countless prayers had been offered there. The abbey was more than a building. It was a sacred space where the divine and the earthly met, where monarchy and faith intertwined. William squeezed Kate's hand again, a silent acknowledgement that they were almost there. She returned the gesture, drawing strength from his presence. They had been through so much together. The intense media scrutiny during their courtship, the pressures of royal life, the joys of parenthood, and the sorrows of loss. Through it all, they had remained partners, supporting each other and presenting a united front to the world. The vehicles slowed as they approached the abbey's entrance. Members of the clergy, dressed in ornate ceremonial robes, stood ready to receive the arriving guests. The archbishop, who would conduct the coronation ceremony, was already inside making final preparations. The crown, scepter, and other regalia had been carefully transported and were waiting to be used in the sacred ritual that would officially transform Charles into king. As the motorcade came to a complete stop, palace staff and security officers moved into position. Car doors were opened with practiced precision, and a red carpet stretched from the vehicle to the Abbey's entrance provided a path for the royal family. The moment had arrived. After all the preparation, all the anticipation, all the planning, it was time for William, Kate, and their children to step out and take their places in this historic ceremony. George straightened his jacket one more time, remembering everything his parents had taught him about how to conduct himself. Charlotte checked that her dress was arranged properly, wanting to look perfect for the cameras she knew would be capturing every moment. Louis took a deep breath, gathering his energy and trying to remember his mother's instructions to walk calmly and stay close. Kate stepped out first, her dress flowing elegantly as she emerged into the public eye. The crowd's cheers intensified, a roar of approval and affection. She had won the hearts of the British people through years of dedicated service, always conducting herself with dignity, while also showing genuine warmth and relatability. She was their princess, and they loved her for it. William followed, his military uniform impressive in its formal grandeur. He stood tall, his bearing that of a man who understood his duty and accepted it willingly. The weight of expectation rested on his shoulders, but he carried it with the same quiet strength that had characterized his entire adult life. One by one, the children emerged, each receiving their own enthusiastic welcome from the crowd. George looked serious but confident. Charlotte smiled sweetly, and Louis waved with an enthusiasm that made people laugh with delight. Together, the family stood for a brief moment, allowing photographers to capture this significant arrival. Then, with Kate and William leading the way and the children following in their carefully rehearsed order, they began the walk toward the Abbey's entrance, ready to witness history and play their part in a tradition that stretched back nearly 1,000 years. The walk from the vehicles to the Abbey's entrance felt both endless and instantaneous. Every step was measured, every movement observed by thousands of eyes both in person and through television cameras, broadcasting to millions around the world. The red carpet beneath their feet was soft, absorbing the sound of their footsteps and adding to the dreamlike quality of the moment. Kate maintained her graceful posture, her years of experience in the public eye evident in the effortless way she moved. William's mind was a mixture of thoughts as he walked. He thought of his father, who was inside preparing for the most significant moment of his life. Charles had waited longer than any heir in British history to become king, and now that moment had finally arrived. William felt a surge of emotion thinking about his father's dedication and patience. He also thought of his late grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, whose presence felt almost tangible in this place where she had been crowned so many years ago. George walked with careful concentration, mindful of the cameras and the importance of the occasion. He had been told stories about his great-grandmother's coronation, shown photographs and footage of that day in 1953. Now he was part of a similar moment, creating memories that would one day be shown to his own children and grandchildren. The weight of this realization was both exciting and slightly overwhelming for someone so young. Charlotte moved with natural elegance beside her brother, her dress swaying gently with each step. She had watched recordings of royal events, studying how her mother and other female members of the family carried themselves. She wanted to make her parents proud, to show that she understood the responsibility that came with being a princess. Her smile was genuine but controlled, warm but dignified, a perfect balance that seemed to come naturally to her. Louis, despite his best efforts to remain composed, couldn't help but show his personality. His eyes darted around, taking in every detail of the massive crowd, the magnificent abbey, and the formal proceedings unfolding around him. At one point, he gave an enthusiastic wave that was slightly larger than protocol might suggest, but it was met with delighted cheers from the crowd. Even in the most formal moments, his youthful exuberance was endearing rather than inappropriate. As they approached the abbey's grand entrance, the sound of organ music drifted out to meet them. The deep resonant notes seemed to vibrate through the air, adding gravitas to the moment. The music was both solemn and celebratory, acknowledging the sacred nature of the coronation while also rejoicing in the continuation of tradition. Composers had crafted pieces specifically for this day, blending classical styles with contemporary touches. Members of the clergy waited at the entrance, their ceremonial vestments rich with gold thread and intricate embroidery. These robes had been worn at coronations for centuries, each one maintained with meticulous care and respect for tradition. The Archbishop offered a slight bow as the family approached, a gesture of respect that acknowledged both their royal status and their role in the ceremony about to unfold. Inside the abbey, the atmosphere was hushed despite the presence of thousands of guests. Dignitaries from around the world had gathered. Presidents, prime ministers, monarchs from other nations, and representatives from every Commonwealth realm. They sat in sections carefully arranged according to protocol and diplomatic considerations. Each guest understood they were witnessing a rare and historic event. Coronations didn't happen often. They marked the transition from one reign to another, moments that defined eras. The abbey itself was transformed for the occasion. Flowers adorned every available space, their colors carefully chosen to represent unity and celebration. Gold and crimson fabrics draped walls and pillars, creating an atmosphere of royal splendor. Lighting had been positioned to highlight the architectural beauty of the space while ensuring that every moment of the ceremony would be clearly visible to those present and those watching remotely. Kate paused at the threshold, taking in the magnificent scene before her. She had been in Westminster Abbey many times before, for her own wedding, for memorial services, for various state occasions. But today it looked different. The scale of decoration, the number of distinguished guests, and the palpable sense of history made everything feel heightened, more significant. William placed a gentle hand on George's shoulder, a small gesture of support and guidance. Father and son exchanged a look, and William could see both nervousness and excitement in his eldest child's eyes. He remembered being around George's age when his own mother, Princess Diana, had taken him to important events. She had always found ways to make him feel included and important, while also helping him understand the expectations placed upon him. Charlotte reached for her mother's hand, and Kate gave it a reassuring squeeze. The bond between mother and daughter was evident in that simple touch. Kate had worked hard to give her children as normal a childhood as possible, while also preparing them for their unique roles. She wanted them to understand duty and service while also knowing joy and freedom. It was a delicate balance, one she navigated with thoughtfulness and love. Louis looked up at his father with wide eyes, suddenly aware of just how grand everything was. William smiled down at him, a warm, encouraging smile that said everything would be fine. He remembered being young and overwhelmed by royal events, and he wanted his children to feel supported rather than intimidated. An usher, dressed in formal livery, stepped forward to guide the family to their designated seats. These were not just any seats. They were positioned where they would have a clear view of the coronation throne and the altar where the sacred rituals would take place. From here, they would witness every moment of the ceremony, every word spoken, every gesture made. As they moved through the abbey, walking down the ancient aisle where countless royal processions had passed before them, Kate was struck by the continuity of it all. This building had stood for nearly 1,000 years, surviving wars, fires, and the rise and fall of dynasties. Yet here it remained, still serving as the setting for the nation's most important ceremonies. There was something deeply moving about being part of that long chain of history. The guests they passed stood as they approached, a sign of respect for their royal status. Kate and William acknowledged these gestures with slight nods, maintaining the formal protocols while also conveying warmth. They recognized many faces, family members, close friends, diplomats they had worked with over the years. Each person present had a reason for being there, a connection to the monarchy or the nation that warranted their inclusion in this select gathering. Finally, they reached their seats positioned prominently but not ostentatiously. This was, after all, King Charles's day. William, Kate, and their children were there to support him, to witness his coronation and to represent the future of the monarchy. As they settled into their places, adjusting clothing and ensuring the children were comfortable, the magnitude of what was about to happen settled over them. The ceremony would begin soon and history would be made. The moments before the ceremony officially began were filled with quiet anticipation. Throughout the abbey, guests sat in hushed reverence, occasionally whispering to one another but mostly absorbed in their own thoughts about the significance of what they were about to witness. The television cameras positioned at strategic points remained focused, capturing every detail for the billions of viewers tuning in from every corner of the globe. Kate glanced around the abbey, noticing familiar faces among the assembled dignitaries. She saw fellow royals from European monarchies, some who had become genuine friends over the years through various state visits and official functions. There were representatives from Commonwealth nations, their presence a reminder of the far-reaching connections the British monarchy maintained across continents and cultures. She also spotted celebrities, military leaders, and religious figures, each bringing their own perspective to this ancient ceremony. George sat very still, his hands folded in his lap as he had been taught. He was acutely aware of the cameras and the importance of his behavior. As the eldest child and second in line to the throne after his father, he understood that expectations for him were particularly high. Yet despite the pressure, there was also a sense of pride. He was old enough to grasp that he was witnessing something truly special, a moment that would be discussed and analyzed for years to come. Charlotte looked around with curious eyes, taking in the stunning architecture of the Abbey. The soaring ceilings, the intricate stone carvings, the magnificent stained glass windows that filtered colored light into the space. Everything spoke of artistry and devotion spanning centuries. She had studied history and knew that some of Britain's greatest figures were buried here, their monuments and memorials surrounding the congregation. It made her feel connected to something larger than herself. Louis was doing his best to sit quietly, though his natural energy made stillness a challenge. Kate kept a gentle, watchful eye on him, ready to redirect his attention if needed. She understood that expecting perfect behavior from such a young child during a long ceremony was unrealistic. The key was to help him feel engaged rather than bored, to give him small things to focus on that would keep him occupied. William's thoughts drifted to his father, who was in a private area of the Abbey preparing for his grand entrance. Charles had spent his entire life preparing for this role, studying constitutional law, meeting with prime ministers, representing the crown at countless events around the world. He had used his platform to champion causes he believed in: environmental conservation, architectural preservation, support for young people. Now at last he would be formally crowned, taking on the full weight of sovereignty. The organ music swelled, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. A hush fell over the congregation, and every person seemed to lean forward slightly, not wanting to miss a single moment. The clergy members moved into position, their movements practiced and precise. Years of rehearsals had gone into planning this ceremony, ensuring that every element would unfold smoothly. Kate reached over and gently adjusted Charlotte's dress, making sure it lay perfectly. It was an instinctive motherly gesture, one that showed her ability to balance her role as a royal figure with her identity as a parent. She caught William's eye and they shared a brief smile. Despite the grandeur surrounding them, they remained grounded in their partnership and their family. The procession began with junior clergy members, then senior bishops, each carrying ceremonial items or moving in formation as prescribed by ancient tradition. The choreography of the ceremony was like a carefully orchestrated dance, every step and gesture laden with symbolic meaning. Some elements dated back centuries, while others had been adapted to reflect contemporary values and sensibilities. Kate watched as various regalia items were carried past, the swords representing justice and mercy, the orb symbolizing the Christian world, the scepters representing temporal and spiritual authority. Each object was crafted with extraordinary skill, many of them containing precious metals and gemstones that caught the light magnificently. These were not merely decorative items. They were symbols of the responsibilities and duties that came with kingship. George leaned toward his father and whispered a question about one of the ceremonial objects he saw passing by. William answered quietly, using the opportunity to educate his son about the history and meaning behind the traditions they were witnessing. These teaching moments were precious, ways of passing down knowledge and understanding from one generation to the next. The choir began to sing, their voices rising in perfect harmony through the vaulted space of the Abbey. The sound was transcendent, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The music had been selected to reflect both tradition and the specific character of this coronation. Some pieces were centuries old, sung at coronations throughout history. Others were newly composed, commissioned specifically for this day. Kate felt goosebumps rise on her arms as the music washed over her. Despite being raised outside royal circles, she had come to deeply appreciate these moments when tradition, ceremony, and faith came together. There was something profoundly moving about being part of rituals that connected the present to the distant past, that acknowledged both the temporal and the eternal. Charlotte sat mesmerized by the choir, her love of music evident in her rapt attention. She had been taking piano lessons and had recently joined a school choir herself. Hearing such accomplished singers in this magnificent setting inspired her, showing her what dedication and practice could achieve. She made a mental note to tell her music teacher about this experience. Louis was fascinated by the colorful robes and the way the clergy members moved in formation. To his young eyes, it was like watching a very formal parade or a theatrical performance. Kate noticed his interest and felt relieved. As long as he remained engaged, he was more likely to stay calm and well-behaved throughout the lengthy ceremony. The moment everyone had been waiting for was approaching. The music shifted, taking on a more majestic tone. The congregation rose to their feet as one, the rustling of fabric and movement creating a wave through the abbey. Kate smoothed her dress and stood with practiced grace. William stood tall beside her, placing a guiding hand on George's shoulder. Charlotte rose elegantly, and Louis scrambled to his feet with youthful enthusiasm. The doors at the far end of the abbey opened wider, and the king's procession began. First came the high-ranking nobility, followed by members of the royal family who would walk ahead of Charles. Each person moved with deliberate, measured steps, maintaining the solemnity the occasion demanded. The train of the procession seemed endless, a river of crimson, gold, and purple flowing through the ancient church. Kate's heart swelled with emotion as she thought about what this moment meant for her father-in-law. She had watched Charles navigate the complexities of being heir apparent, balancing his desire to make a difference with the constraints of his position. She had seen his dedication to his sons, his devotion to duty, and his genuine care for the people he would now serve as king. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew he would face them with sincerity and commitment. William felt a complex mixture of emotions as his father's procession drew closer. Pride certainly, but also a poignant awareness of the passage of time and the weight of destiny. One day he would walk this same path, would take these same vows, would wear this same crown. But that was for the future. Today belonged to his father, and William was determined to support him fully in this momentous transition. King Charles finally came into view, and the abbey seemed to hold its collective breath. He moved with measured dignity, his expression serious yet peaceful, reflecting the gravity of the moment and his readiness to embrace it. His ceremonial robes were magnificent, heavy with embroidery and symbolism, yet he wore them with natural ease. This was the role he had been born to fulfill, and decades of preparation had led to this single defining moment. Beside Charles walked Queen Camilla, her own robes elegant and appropriately grand. She had traveled a long and sometimes difficult journey to reach this point, facing public scrutiny and gradually winning acceptance through years of quiet, dedicated service. Today she stood beside her husband as he became king, and she would be crowned queen consort, a recognition of her place in the monarchy and in Charles's life. William watched his father with intense focus, memorizing every detail. He knew that one day, he would need to recall this moment to draw upon it when his own coronation arrived. He studied his father's bearing, the way he acknowledged the congregation with slight nods while maintaining the formal composure the ceremony required. There was an art to balancing accessibility with majesty, and Charles was demonstrating it masterfully. Kate noticed tears in the eyes of several guests as Charles passed their section. The emotion in the room was palpable, a mixture of joy, respect, and historical awareness. Some people had waited their entire lives to witness a coronation. Queen Elizabeth's coronation in 1953 had been the last one, meaning that most people alive today had never experienced such an event. This was truly a once-in-a-lifetime occasion. George stood on his toes slightly, trying to get a better view of his grandfather. He felt a surge of affection and pride seeing Charles move toward the coronation chair. His grandfather had always made time for him, teaching him about nature, showing him how to paint, telling him stories about the family's history. Now that beloved grandfather was becoming king, and George understood perhaps for the first time just how important and beloved his grandfather was to the entire nation. Charlotte thought about how beautiful Queen Camilla looked, her crown and robe sparkling in the abbey's lighting. She imagined herself one day attending similar ceremonies, perhaps even being part of them in more central ways. The thought was both thrilling and slightly intimidating. She glanced at her mother, drawing strength from Kate's calm presence and graceful demeanor. Louis watched with wide eyes as his grandfather approached the coronation chair. That ancient seat, with its worn wood and historic significance, looked almost magical in this setting. Louis didn't fully understand all the complexities of monarchy and succession, but he knew this was very important, and he could feel the excitement and reverence in the air around him. The Archbishop stepped forward, his voice carrying through the abbey with practiced clarity as he began the formal questions that would precede the anointing and crowning. He asked Charles to make solemn promises, to govern with justice and mercy, to uphold the laws of the land, to defend the faith, to serve the people. These were not mere formalities, but binding commitments that would define Charles's reign. Charles responded to each question with steady conviction, his voice clear and firm. He was making promises not just to the people gathered in the abbey, but to millions of citizens across the United Kingdom and Commonwealth realms. He was pledging to dedicate the remainder of his life to service, to put duty above personal preference, to be a symbol of continuity and stability in an ever-changing world. Kate felt the weight of those promises, understanding from her own experience what they truly meant. Royal service wasn't glamorous behind the scenes. It was endless engagements, constant scrutiny, sacrificed privacy, and the subordination of personal desires to public duty. Yet it was also meaningful, offering opportunities to make real differences in people's lives, to champion important causes, and to represent something larger than oneself. The most sacred part of the ceremony approached: the anointing. A canopy was brought forward and held over Charles, creating a private space within the public ceremony for this ancient and holy ritual. The anointing was the moment that transformed a man into a monarch in the eyes of the church and tradition. It had been performed at coronations for over 1,000 years, connecting Charles to every English and British monarch who had come before. The abbey fell into profound silence as the anointing took place beneath the canopy, hidden from view but present in everyone's imagination. This was the mystical heart of the coronation, the point where earthly power and divine blessing intersected. Even those watching who held no religious faith could feel the significance of the moment, the way ritual and symbolism could create meaning and mark important transitions. William bowed his head, offering a private prayer for his father. He prayed for wisdom, strength, and guidance for Charles in the years ahead. He prayed for the nation, for unity and prosperity. He prayed for his own family, that they might continue to support each other through whatever challenges the future might bring. In this ancient place surrounded by centuries of history, prayer felt both natural and profound. Kate's thoughts turned to Queen Elizabeth, who had been such a stabilizing presence throughout her own entry into royal life. Elizabeth had shown her kindness and patience, offering guidance without judgment, allowing Kate to find her own way while providing wisdom when needed. Kate wished Elizabeth could be here to see her son crowned, though in another sense, perhaps she was. Her legacy infused every aspect of the ceremony, her example an invisible guide for all who would follow. The canopy was removed, and Charles sat in the coronation chair, now anointed and ready to receive the crown. The moment felt suspended in time, as if the entire world had paused to witness this transformation. The crown jewels had been brought forth, each item placed carefully and ceremonially. The swords, the orb, the ring, the glove, each carried to Charles and presented with ancient words and gestures. George watched as his grandfather received each item, trying to remember the significance of each one that his father had explained to him during their preparations. The orb represented authority over the earth. The scepter represented leadership and justice. The ring symbolized the marriage between the monarch and the nation. Each object was heavy with meaning and history. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The Archbishop lifted St. Edward's crown, that ancient and sacred object that had crowned British monarchs for centuries. The crown was heavy, both literally and symbolically, weighing several pounds and representing the weight of responsibility that came with sovereignty. The jewels embedded in it caught the light, sending fragments of rainbow color dancing across the abbey's walls. The Archbishop spoke the traditional words as he lowered the crown onto Charles's head, and at that precise moment a great cheer went up from outside the abbey, where crowds had been watching on large screens. Inside, trumpets sounded. Bells began to ring and the congregation called out in unison, acknowledging their new king. The transformation was complete. Charles was no longer merely the heir or the Prince of Wales. He was now, fully and officially, king. Kate felt tears prick her eyes as she witnessed this culminating moment. Beside her, William stood tall and proud, his face reflecting the depth of emotion he felt. George, Charlotte, and Louis all watched with varying degrees of understanding, but unified in their sense that something extraordinary had just occurred. Their grandfather was king. Their father would one day be king, and they were part of a story that stretched back through centuries and would continue long into the future. The coronation ceremony continued with the crowning of Queen Camilla, another historic moment as she received her own crown and took her place beside the newly crowned King Charles. The Queen's crown, though less imposing than the King's, was nonetheless magnificent, glittering with diamonds and representing her role as consort and partner to the monarch. She received it with dignified grace, her expression reflecting both the honor and the responsibility she now carried. William watched as his stepmother was crowned, feeling genuine happiness for her. Over the years, Camilla had proven herself through steady service and unwavering support for his father. She had faced enormous challenges with quiet strength, never complaining about the scrutiny or the comparisons that were inevitably made. She had earned her place through dedication and love, and William respected her deeply for it. Kate observed the tender glance that Charles and Camilla exchanged after she was crowned. Despite the formality of the setting and the thousands of watching eyes, their connection was evident. They had found happiness together, and that partnership would strengthen them both in the demanding years ahead. Kate understood the importance of such a bond, knowing from her own marriage how much easier challenges became when faced with a true partner. The religious service that formed the latter part of the coronation continued with hymns, prayers, and readings from Scripture. Each element had been carefully selected to reflect both traditional values and contemporary concerns. The Archbishop spoke of service, duty, compassion, and justice, qualities that would define a successful reign in the modern era. The words resonated through the Abbey, reminding everyone present that monarchy, while rooted in history, must remain relevant to current times. George listened attentively to the sermon, picking out words and concepts he recognized from his studies and his parents' teachings. He was beginning to understand that being royal wasn't primarily about crowns and palaces. It was about service and responsibility. His grandfather was promising to spend the rest of his life working for others, putting the nation's needs above his own desires. It was a sobering realization for a young boy, but also an inspiring one. Charlotte was moved by the beauty of the music and the solemnity of the prayers. She had a contemplative nature and found meaning in the spiritual aspects of the ceremony. She thought about how lucky she was to witness this event, to be part of a family with such deep roots and such important responsibilities. She silently promised herself that she would work hard to be worthy of the privilege she had been born into. Louis, though he had moments of restlessness, managed to stay mostly calm throughout the long ceremony. Kate periodically whispered encouragement to him, pointing out interesting details to keep him engaged. She was proud of how well all three children had behaved, knowing that it required significant effort from them to maintain composure for such an extended period. As the formal coronation rituals concluded, attention turned to the procession that would carry King Charles and Queen Camilla back through the Abbey and out to the waiting crowds. This would be their first appearance as crowned monarchs, a moment of celebration and connection with the people. The choir began singing a joyful anthem, and the atmosphere in the Abbey shifted from solemn reverence to jubilant celebration. William knew that soon he and his family would need to join the procession, following behind his father and stepmother as they made their way out of the Abbey. He gathered his children with a glance, checking that they were ready for this next phase. They would walk together as a family, presenting an image of continuity and unity to the watching world. Kate stood and smoothed her dress one final time, preparing for the walk back down the aisle. She took a moment to look around the Abbey, wanting to imprint this memory firmly in her mind. Everything about the day, the music, the prayers, the rituals, the emotions had combined to create something truly unforgettable. She felt privileged to have been present, to have witnessed history in the making. The newly crowned King Charles and Queen Camilla began their procession, moving slowly down the aisle with the full regalia and ceremony their new status demanded. The congregation stood once more, bowing and curtsying as the royal couple passed. Charles moved with newfound authority, the weight of the crown visible but not diminishing his bearing. He had become what he was always meant to be, and he carried it well. As they passed the section where William, Kate, and the children stood, Charles caught his son's eye. A look of profound understanding passed between them, acknowledgement of the journey they were both on, the roles they would each play, and the bond between father and son that transcended titles and ceremonies. William nodded slightly, a gesture of support and respect that said everything that needed to be said in that moment. Kate curtsied gracefully as the king and queen passed, a gesture she had performed countless times but which now carried new meaning. These were not just her father-in-law and his wife. They were the crowned king and queen, and proper deference was both required and genuinely felt. Charlotte followed her mother's example perfectly, her curtsy elegant and appropriate. The boys bowed, George with serious precision and Louis with endearing earnestness. When the appropriate moment came, William led his family into the procession, falling into step behind other members of the royal family. They walked with practiced coordination, each person maintaining their place and pace. George concentrated on his steps, determined not to stumble or draw negative attention. Charlotte glided along gracefully, her natural poise serving her well. Louis held his mother's hand, drawing comfort and guidance from her steady presence. As they emerged from the abbey into the bright daylight, the sound of the crowds hit them like a physical force. Thousands upon thousands of people filled every available space, their cheers and applause creating a roar that echoed off surrounding buildings. Flags waved frantically, creating a sea of red, white, and blue that stretched as far as the eye could see. The celebration was genuine and enthusiastic, reflecting the nation's embrace of this historic moment. William and Kate waved to the crowds, their smiles genuine and warm. They had learned over years of public service how to connect with people, how to make individuals in a massive crowd feel seen and acknowledged. The children also waved, each in their own style, George with controlled dignity, Charlotte with sweet charm, and Louis with infectious enthusiasm that made people laugh with delight. The family made their way to the waiting vehicles that would carry them in procession back to Buckingham Palace. The route would take them through central London, allowing more people to see the newly crowned king and queen and the royal family that would support them. It would be a longer journey than the morning's trip to the Abbey, designed to maximize public participation in the celebration. As they settled into their vehicle for the return procession, Kate looked at her family with deep satisfaction. They had all risen to the occasion beautifully, conducting themselves with the dignity and grace the day required. William caught her eye and smiled, sharing her sense of accomplishment and relief that this major milestone had been successfully navigated. George looked out the window as the motorcade began to move, watching the crowds with fresh eyes. He felt different somehow, as if witnessing his grandfather's coronation had awakened something in him, a deeper understanding of his own future, perhaps, or simply a more mature appreciation for the role his family played in the nation's life. He waved to the people lining the streets, feeling connected to them in a new way. Charlotte sat contentedly, replaying the ceremony in her mind and savoring the special memories she had created. She would remember this day for the rest of her life, and she knew it would become one of the defining experiences of her childhood. She felt proud to be part of such an important moment in history. Louis pressed his face against the window, still full of energy despite the long morning. He pointed out interesting sights to his family, unusual costumes in the crowd, creative signs and banners, street performers who had positioned themselves along the route. His enthusiasm was infectious, reminding everyone that even on the most formal occasions, there was room for joy and wonder. As the procession wound its way through London toward Buckingham Palace, where balcony appearances and further celebrations awaited, the family savored these moments together. They had arrived at Westminster Abbey that morning as prominent members of the royal family. They were leaving as witnesses to history, having seen King Charles crowned and having played their own small but significant part in a ceremony that would be remembered for generations. The day was far from over, but already it had exceeded every expectation, creating memories that would last a lifetime and beyond.